Thank you. Master Treasurer, Masters of the Bench, ladies and gentlemen, the aim of my reading tonight is to provide a non-technical introduction to the crypto world for those of you to whom it remains a complete mystery. If you are a techie, now is a good time to take a nap. I'm going to start talking about money. What takes us beyond a barter economy, the exchange of goods or services for other goods or services, is money, which is why it's my starting point. Use of gold or silver as a medium of exchange probably started in China, certainly elsewhere as well. Some of you may be aware that the large stone statues in Eastern Ireland were used as a form of currency. And gold or silver is mined. And excuse the pun, that word is to be borne in mind for later. The gold and silver that was used as currency in ancient times was authenticated by the rulers. A gold ingot would be stamped to prove that it was pure gold. And then somebody, somewhere, probably a couple of thousand years ago, said, why don't we cut the gold ingots down into smaller pieces and put a stamp on each of them to show that it is authentic and pure gold or pure silver, and invented coinage. So people were able to carry around small pieces of gold or small pieces of silver and use them as money. And those coins were circulated, which is why we now refer to them as currency, which is derived from the Latin word for running, running in circles, and therefore distributed round and about. And if they are minted, a word I shall also return to later, you will bear that in mind as well and understand that I've got something to say later on about the difference between mining and minting. And then about 2,000 years ago, again, probably in China, somebody had the bright idea of paper money. Why carry around bits of metal if you can carry around a piece of paper? And hence we get paper money. And you may be interested, as I am, to note that paper money is often regarded in this country as an example of a promissory note, a promise to pay. We talk about £5 notes, £10 notes, whereas our cousins in the United States like to refer to it as a bill of exchange. And so they talk about a $5 bill or a $10 bill. So the next thing I want you to think about is money in the bank. So some of you will be receiving regular payments for legal services. Some of you will be receiving a grant, hopefully from this inn, but at least from somewhere, which will enable you to pursue your studies to become lawyers. And you might put the money in the bank. What does the bank do with it? The bank lends it to somebody else. So when the bank lends your money to somebody else, where is your money? And the answer, I suggest, your money is on a ledger. So you might like to think back to Charles Dickens, who was a student in this inn. And if you look in the library, you will see the facsimile of a petition he wrote to the inn quite a long time ago, I think in the 1850s, saying my novels are doing quite well and I've decided not to pursue a career at the bar, so please can I have my deposit back? And if you ask the librarian what happened then, she will tell you he got his deposit back. So we were honest about that at least. So your money is lent out to somebody else, it's on a ledger, and you might imagine Bob Cratchit keeping a record of Scrooge's money on a ledger on a high stool and possibly with a quill pen. And now, of course, nobody keeps records of money with a quill pen. They keep it on a computer. And therefore, the bank has a computerized ledger which records how much money you owe the bank or the bank owes you. And the statement of account, which you will receive periodically, will show as a credit what the bank owes you and as a debit in what you owe the bank. And you can write checks. It's old-fashioned these days, but people do sometimes still write checks. And a check will be an instruction to the bank to pay some of your money to somebody else. And we have debit cards, which enable you to use your money without actually possessing any pieces of paper or bits of metal. And you have credit cards. I can't see any obvious match between a credit card and a credit balance on a bank statement, but that may be because banks habitually give the picture according to their point of view, not to your point of view. The essential point, I suggest, is that your money, whether you owe it to the bank or the bank owes it to you, is recorded on a computerized ledger. That's the first part of what I want to say. The second part of what I want to say concerns the post. Now we have a post office. We have a public post office. We also, as lawyers, have our own private post office system called the Document Exchange, or DX. They both share one characteristic, which is a central sorting office. The penny black stamp was invented in the 1840s as a way of prepayment for postal services, and then the postal services took off. Now, emails do not go through a central sorting office. They are exchanged on what some people like to call a peer-to-peer system, that is, equals exchanging messages. Now, a provider of emails needs you to have a computer. You can't exchange emails without having a computer. Of course, that would include a mobile phone, which is a fairly miniaturized computer. In order to use the email system, you have to have an internet service provider. Let's call that a public key, because everybody who uses emails can use an internet service provider. Doesn't have to be the same one, but it has to be something which is publicly available. So we could call it a public key, a key to which any member of the public can have access. You also need a private email address, comparable to your private postal address. So let's call that a private key. So in order to send and receive emails, you need your public key, the internet service provider, and you need your private key, which is your email address. And then you can send an email to somebody who has maybe the same public key, but maybe not. Maybe it's a slightly different public key, but one which a lot of other people are using. But only you have your private key, your own email address, and only the person to whom you are sending your email has their own private key, their private address. And you can communicate with somebody by email without there being any sort of central sorting office like there is with the post. Now, if you combine those two ideas, you start with the computerized ledger, and you add to that the exchange of emails on a computer, you can end up with something which you can call a computerized ledger, where you are able to use the computerized internet to send somebody else a message which will involve the exchange of other things, in particular, the exchange of money. Now, in 2008, someone, again, basing themselves on the work of others, or a group of people, came up with the idea of sharing a computerized ledger which had a whole lot of data that was common to everybody who used the system. That person was named as Satoshi Nakamoto, a Japanese name, though whether it was actually a Japanese person or a group of Japanese people is somewhat doubtful. Some have claimed that it was actually an Australian pretending to be a Japanese person. And in a case decided in the Court of Appeal as recently as the 3rd of February this year, a case called Tulip Trading Limited and Van der Laan, the reference to which on Bailey I can give to anybody who's interested afterwards. An Australian, a Dr. Craig Wright, claimed that he was Satoshi Nakamoto, a claim which a lot of other people want to dispute. Now, the idea of a computerized ledger being shared by anybody who subscribes can be called a distributed ledger, because the data on the computer that everybody has, which is in the same form, it's the same data on different computers, enables every entry on that computer system to be changed and shown as the changed data on everybody's computer. That's everybody who is joined in on that particular scheme. To gain access to the distributed ledger, you need, of course, a computer. You also need a public key, which is the provider of this system. And you need a private key, which typically in these days is a string of 70 or more characters, which you cannot possibly memorize, and which therefore, if you have one, you have to look after very carefully indeed. More of that in a moment. Now, as you can imagine, the data which is stored on the distributed ledger, which I repeat is a ledger to which everybody has access who is part of the system, quickly gets filled up. And if it gets filled up, then you need to seal the block of data which has already been put on the computerized ledger and move on and make a new block. Now, there is a system for making a new block of data, and it's called mining, by analogy with digging up gold and digging up silver. It's actually got nothing to do with mining. And the system is that people compete to solve fiendishly difficult mathematical puzzles, essentially to discover a code, which is known in the trade as a hash, which is done by trial and error. So if you are competing with other people to solve this fiendishly difficult puzzle, the person with the best, fastest computer will win. And the person with the best, fastest computer will get a reward, which is usually something like, if it was Bitcoin, some Bitcoin. Nobody seems to be quite sure who is setting the problem. Some people say it's people in China who are setting it, and other people saying it's being set by a computer using some sort of randomized method of doing it. I certainly don't know. It is certainly a very, very wasteful process, because the amount of electricity that is consumed by the winning computer, not to mention the losing computers, is said to be enough to heat and light a small town in the United Kingdom, which is not a good idea. Once the new block has been created, it's chained to the previous block. And therefore the chain of blocks is called blockchain. And that's the origin of the word blockchain. Now with Bitcoin, which was the first computerized ledger system of which I've been describing, a new block is added approximately every 15 minutes or so. Bitcoin was intended and still is meant to be a finite system. So eventually the possible numbers or amounts of Bitcoin will all have been created and Bitcoin will come to an end. There are currently well over 1,000 different cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin is the best known because it was the first. And if you're interested, probably the second best known is Ethereum. So you may be asking, well, that's all very well. So we know that a distributed ledger is where the data is held, which will indicate how much you may possess in terms of a cryptocurrency. But how does the cryptocurrency itself be created? So the answer to that is you need a computer program. You're probably, all of you, familiar with the kind of computer program which sets up your Chambers website. Or if you're not yet in Chambers, if you're one of the pupils present, you know where your Chambers, of which you are a pupil, has its website. And if you haven't got to that stage either, you will know that most Chambers have a system for attracting pupils and a dedicated pupils website on their computer. Now, the computer was developed by numerous contributions by such people as Charles Babbage, who developed a working mechanical computer in the middle of the 19th century. You all, I hope, will have heard of Alan Turing at Bletchley Park during the Second World War, developing the first advanced electronic computer, and Tim Berners-Lee, developer of the World Wide Web, none of whom, I imagine, of them would have claimed to work solely and exclusively alone, but each of whom, as it happens, was British. Is there a reasonably simple explanation of how a computer works? I asked myself. And the answer is, I think so. Let me try and explain. What a computer does is store information and process the information and store the result afterwards. The mental image that I find most useful in understanding how a computer stores information has got nothing at all to do with the way that a computer does store information. Imagine a large warehouse which is completely empty, but the floor of which is filled with buckets. And each bucket is either full of water or it's empty. And the computer keeps those buckets either full of water or empty of water so that there is a record of that stage. And therefore processing can be imagined. This has nothing to do with reality. There isn't any water in a computer. Processing by a computer can be seen as emptying a bucket or filling a bucket or keeping a bucket in the same state that it was. So each process, if you adopt this metaphor, and I repeat, it is nothing more than a metaphor, each process involves a choice between a full bucket and an empty bucket. There are only two choices, which is why a computer is said to work on a binary system. The instructions to the computer to fill a bucket or empty a bucket can also be imagined in that way. It can be imagined as a current going through a gate. In the kind of computers that existed when I was in my 20s, the gates were controlled by valves, and the computers were enormous, big enough to fill a room, until the invention of the transistor, which enabled that to be used as a gate. It's either on or it's off. The current goes one way or it goes another way. There are always two possible paths and only two possible paths. So the instructions which way to go, fill the bucket or don't fill the bucket, go through the gate, turn left, go through the gate, turn right, or however you want to imagine it, are laid out in a program. And the program is written in a code. For the benefit of human beings, the code can be read in a language, because you can program a computer to produce, or you can invent a language. And the humans who operate the processing system can read the code, and more importantly, they can write the code. So far as the computer is concerned, the code is simply two choices, on or off, 0 or 1, and nothing more than that. So how does a cryptocurrency program get on the computer? Somebody somewhere writes a code which enables the computer to store information, to process that information, and then store the result of the processing. That's the present. You probably know that although what Einstein said about big things is now considered to be correct, but what Einstein says about big things doesn't work for very tiny things. The world of quantum mechanics. As far as large things are concerned, as principally discovered by Albert Einstein. And you probably know of the attempts being made to reconcile the two systems, which at the moment appears to be wholly impossible. So quantum mechanics faces the difficult problem of explaining what happens to small things. For example, why an electron can be in two places at the same time. Now, it is no part of this talk to explain to you how an electron can be in two places at the same time, or an electron fired at a sheet of something where there are two possible holes will go through both holes apparently at the same time. I have no idea. I'd be surprised if anybody here does. But this is the world of quantum mechanics. So the future of computers is to use quantum mechanics, or the ideas of quantum mechanics, which will produce something which can process information incredibly fast, possibly doing two things with one thing at the same time. And it can be miniaturized to an extent which we cannot now imagine. That's quantum mechanics. So where have we got to? You can use a computer and the program on a computer written in code to invent a system for money, which is what we call cryptocurrency. So that is what cryptocurrency actually is. It's something which only exists on a computer by a coding written by coders, stored, processed, with the results being stored again. So we talk about cryptocurrency in relation to money systems, which can be stored on a computer and accessed if you're using distributed ledgers. You can also use it to create crypto tokens. That is something which can be exchanged for something else. So you can have a crypto token, which you can exchange for cryptocurrency. Let's say you have cryptocurrency kept in what would be called a virtual wallet. That is a wallet which only exists on your computer in terms of software. And you then have a choice between keeping the token, exchanging the token for something you would rather have, like stocks and shares quoted on a stock exchange, or money. If you exchange what is in your virtual wallet for something which is very similar that goes into another virtual wallet, you are changing it in some way, and that is known in the computer world as minting it. I said I'd come back to the difference between mining and minting. Mining is creating the next block in the blockchain. Minting is creating something which has come from another virtual wallet into a different virtual wallet. And the reason why I make a point of that is some judges recently have unfortunately failed to distinguish between mining and minting. And they talk about mining when they mean minting, and they talk about minting when they mean mining. So you have to be careful when you read some of the cases. You don't only have to use this crypto world for money or even tokens which can be exchanged for something else. For example, you could use the blockchain system for recording vehicle registrations and do it perhaps a lot more efficiently and sensibly than it's currently being done in South Wales. You could also use it for a chain of supply. For example, somebody might be growing rice in the Far East, and if they're not using distributed ledgers, they then have to borrow from the bank to get enough rice to put in the paddy fields, and then they have to arrange for it to be shipped to Europe with bills of lading by the carrier and insurance, and maybe more bank borrowing until it arrives in this country and eventually ends up on the supermarket shelf. If you use the distributed ledger to do that, some people think, and I emphasize that, some people think you can get away. You can get away from the banks and the insurers and the bills of lading, and they like to think, best of all, get away from the lawyers, the ones who write the contracts and so on. Well, maybe. I did hear a suggestion once that old age pensioners could be put on the old age pensions could be put on a blockchain, so that anybody who'd reached pensionable age could avoid going to the post office and merely deal on their computer with where their pensions are and so on and so forth. And I say good luck with that. But there certainly is scope for smart contracts, contracts which can be downloaded from a distributed ledger, stored on a distributed ledger, smart wills, perhaps good in theory. I'm not so sure about that. If you go to a solicitor and you say, I'd like to make a will, I've heard that if I give my money to my children more than 6 years before I die, I can save a lot of money in death duties, to which your solicitor will say, how far do you trust your children? Whether a smart will is capable of doing that remains to be seen. You also may have come across another concept, which is non-fungible tokens. Well, if you did O-level Latin, you'll know fungible means something that you can't actually touch. You could, for example, and people now do, have as a non-fungible token an artwork. You can't touch the artwork. You can't actually possess the artwork, but you can see it on your computer and admire it and buy or sell it. There's a very interesting case of Osborne and Persons Unknown, which started before Master Pelling nearly a year ago. I was rather hoping he would be here tonight, but he isn't. Mr. Justice Lavender gave a further judgment in that case on the 13th of January this year, so up to date. Artworks that had existed as non-fungible tokens had been stolen by somebody who moved them from one virtual wallet into another virtual wallet, and from there into another virtual wallet, and then into another virtual wallet. And what is interesting about the case is that Mr. Justice Lavender agreed that the process, the legal documents by which the owner of the non-fungible token could claim to recover the non-fungible artwork, that those legal documents could be served on the prospective defendants by way of a non-fungible token being placed in one of the wallets in the hope that it would then be passed on to the next wallet. And if you opened the non-fungible token, which contained the documents for the proceedings, you would have been served with the proceedings. Perhaps the future lies there. So my final point is this. One essential of the crypto world, which I hope you now have some glimmering of, is that it's not controlled by governments. It could be. China has tried to control it, but so far as I know, hasn't yet succeeded. People who invent forms of cryptocurrency and put them on a distributed ledger, then try to sell them. And they do so by way of a so-called white paper, which says, if you look at it, this is not a prospectus. A prospectus is, of course, those of you who are lawyers will know, and those of you who are not will guess, is something for which you can be sued if you tell lies in it. And the whole point of a white paper is you can't be sued if you tell lies in it because it's not a prospectus. And I'm reminded of the Magritte painting. Magritte, well-known French surrealist painter. He painted a picture of a pipe, and the caption said, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe." This is not a pipe. Now, you could say, no, it's not a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. But it could mean, and I'm not sure, I'm a surrealist, and I'm saying it's not a pipe when it is a pipe, which is what I think a white paper is. I'm saying this is not a prospectus when it is a prospectus. The Financial Conduct Authority seems still to consider that it does not need to have any detailed control of crypto, which I have to say I regard as a totally extraordinary approach for a government body. And therefore they say a white paper is a white paper, it's not a prospectus, and the people who lie in white papers can sleep safe in their beds at night. Now, cryptocurrency is not backed by gold or an economy, as is ordinary money, which rejoices in the crypto world by the name of fiat, for reasons I don't understand, fiat being Latin for let it be, or words to that effect. And therefore, cryptocurrency has no intrinsic value at all, in the sense that gold has an intrinsic value. There is no Bank of England standing behind crypto. There is no Fort Knox standing behind crypto. There is no economy standing behind crypto. So I hear you cry, is it a bubble? My answer is yes, it is a bubble. Should you invest in it? And my answer to that is only if you are happy to gamble and you don't really care whether you lose money that you gamble with or not. Would I invest in cryptocurrency? Absolutely not. If you lose your private key, the 70-digit code, you have a huge problem. There is no central inventory of private keys. One poor gentleman you may have read about in the press lost his private key and is now spending his life searching garbage dumps in the hope of finding the piece of paper on which he wrote the answer. If you have people who hope to inherit some part of your wealth, make sure they've got access to the private key, because when you're dead, there is no way of getting it back. The essence of the crypto world is that it is intended to be secret. The whole idea is that nobody can get at the secrets of the crypto world just because they want to. So is it attractive to fraudsters? Yes, it most certainly is. And there is a thriving business, we lawyers will be pleased to hear, in trying to solve some of the problems which have arisen from the fraudulent use or fraudulent abstraction of cryptocurrency. And there I stop with one last comment. To continue, I do recommend Master Pelling's speech entitled Issues in Cryptocurrency Fraud Claims, which starts where I leave off and which is easily found on the internet by inserting the word Pelling or crypto, or preferably both. Thank you very much for your kind attention.